altar. From the dawn of human culture there is evidence that man was moved to make offerings, probably of a sacrificial kind, to supernatural powers. Even the subhuman precursor of mankind, Neanderthal man about 100,000 BC seems to have practiced a cult which involved the sacrifice of bears. In caves, for example, at Drakenloch, Switzerland, the Petter Shoal near Nuremberg, their skulls have been found carefully arranged in niches and on stone slabs which the prehistorian Jane Marrier has described as the oldest altars of sacrifice so far known. But this interpretation of problematic material of such remote antiquity must necessarily be treated with reserve. More certain is the later evidence from about 6000 BC at Çatalhöyük in Turkey, where a shrine was used for fertility rites, associated with the mother goddess and a bull cult. A low mud brick platform formed a kind of table before a wall adorned with representations of bulls' heads, women's breasts, and human hands. Human skulls were on the altar. These prehistoric examples indicate that from very early times places have been specially used or constructed for the purpose of offering sacrifice. The need to show that the offerings were specifically presented to supernatural beings doubtless caused the altar to be raised above ground level, thus suggesting the idea of a table of the gods, though this analogy must not be pressed too far. The words for altar in Semitic languages merely indicate a place where a victim was slaughtered, while in some Indo-European languages the terms used denote a place where a sacrifice was burned. Their association with deity gave altars an aura of holiness, and the altar could even be regarded as the throne of a deity. Altars in sacrifice. Altars are frequently represented in ancient Egyptian art, and the remains of some still survive in temples. It would seem that the Egyptians regarded altars only as necessary adjuncts to ritual worship. Their altars generally appear to have been light tables, holding food in jars. Temple altars could be large stone erections, with steps, such as the sun altar in the temple of Hatshepsut at Deir el-Bahiri. Tall stands, containing fire, served for burnt offerings. In ancient Mesopotamia, two types of altar generally seem to have been used. Large structures of brick for burnt offerings and small altars of various shapes for burning incense. Altars figured prominently in ancient Jewish worship. Significant examples of early practice occur in Genesis. In chapter 8, Noah builds an altar and offers burnt offerings, and God smelled a pleasing odor. Chapter 22 describes how Abraham built an altar for the sacrifice of his son Isaac. Exodus Chapter 20 records divine instructions for making altars of earth and of unhewn stone, unhewn because the use of tools on the stone would profane it. Altars of bronze and gold and their equipment made by Solomon for the temple in Jerusalem are described in 2 Chronicles, chapter 4. A notable feature of these altars were the horns, which projected at the corners. They appear on a stone altar found at Megiddo, but their origin and significance are uncertain. Exodus, chapter 21, implies that the altar of God was a place of refuge for criminals. The Gospel of Matthew, chapter 23, indicates that in the 1st century AD Jews were accustomed to swear by the altar of the Jerusalem temple. Altars for public and family worship abounded in the ancient civilizations of Greece and Rome. The Greeks distinguished between two kinds of altars. The bomos was used for sacrifices to the Olympian gods, the essence of the victim ascending in the smoke amidst burning. The eschard, hearth, served for the cults of divine heroes and chthonic, underground deities. This was a low structure, but often the sacrifice was performed over a pit, so that the victim's blood descended into the earth. In the Greek temple, the image of the deity, not the altar, was the focus of attention. Altars varied in kind and form. On the Athenian Acropolis, the great altar of the goddess Athene was an outcrop of natural rock, and at Delphi Apollo's altar was reported to be made on the bones of sacrificed victims. Public altars were sometimes of immense size. That of Zeus at Pergamon in Asia Minor was 40 feet high. In both Greece and Italy, small altars were set up in homes and marketplaces, at graves, groves and springs. Offerings included fruit, flowers and libations of wine. Shapes varied, and the Romans often favored cylindrical altars. The altars of Hestia in Athens and Vesta in Rome, where a perpetual fire burned, were essentially the hearths of these cities. Roman tombs frequently took the form of altars, dedicated to the cult of the dead. In ancient Persia, the cult of fire, later associated with Zoroastrianism, stemmed from that reverence for fire which characterized Aryan religion and had its Indian counterpart in the worship of Mani, the Vedic god of fire. Persian fire altars comprised a massive base, surmounted by a stone slab on which stood the fire container. This fire cult has been preserved by the Parsis, whose altars follow the ancient pattern. The Sanskrit word for altar, vidi, originally denoted a trench in which the sacrificial fire burned, and was closely associated with the domestic hearth in ancient India. Early Hindu literature describes other Vedas of different shapes for various kinds of offerings. Great importance was attached to the shape, and special Sanskrit manuals deal in great detail with the matter. Brick altars were constructed in the form of a falcon, heron or tortoise. The Hindu text, the Satapatha Brahmana, compares the shape of an altar with that of a woman. In modern Hinduism, altars were simpler affairs. A square-shaped structure of earth or clay, on which a fire is kindled for offerings of butter. The altar of heaven. Altars were essential to the religions of China. There were two kinds: those used in the public worship of the cosmic powers and those required for the ancestor cult. The most impressive of Chinese altars is the altar of heaven in Peking, at which the Emperor of China, the Son of Heaven, offered sacrifice, the most crucial occasion being at the winter solstice. Japan provides a unique example of an altar, or rather of an ideal altar. The Shinto sectum Tenrikyo reverences Baten Tambaichi as the center of the world and the place where creation culminated. There an unfinished altar is located, which will achieve completion when the teaching of the sect has been preached in all lands and universal brotherhood established in the service of God. Apart from this, Japanese altars have only a practical significance as tables of offerings for incense in Shinto and Buddhist shrines. In Aztec religion, the altar was adapted to the slaughter of human victims. The altar in the great temple of Huitzilopochtli, god of war, in Mexico City, was a block of green stone 5 feet in length and 3 feet in height and width. Its convex top was so fashioned as to present the breast of the victim to the stone knife of the sacrificing priest, who cut out the heart and presented it to the deity. The Christian altar, from earliest times, has been essentially associated with the celebration of the Lord's Supper or Mass. In the early church the rite was doubtless celebrated on wooden tables, but the custom of celebrating it on the tombs of martyrs led to the tradition that stone was the proper material for altars. According to Roman Catholic practice today, even where the structure is mainly in wood, a stone mesa table must be inserted. In Catholic Christianity, both in the Eastern and Western churches, the status of the Mass or Eucharist as the supreme act of public worship has made the altar the focal point of church and cathedral. The development of the doctrine of the sacrifice of the Mass invested the altar with the sacrificial significance. At each Mass the original sacrifice of Christ is represented. The doctrine of transubstantiation, that the bread and wine become the body and blood of Christ, and the custom of keeping the consecrated sacrament in a receptacle on the altar, encouraged the idea of the altar as a throne or local abode of Christ. Reaction against medieval abuses of the Mass was one of the causes of the Reformation, and it led to the abolition of altars in most Protestant churches. The placing of the cross and candles on altars dates from the 10th century. The location of the high altar is usually at the eastern end, but in some modern churches it is placed in the center of the church. The altar on which Christ's sacrifice was reenacted became the focal point of Christian worship. Gothic altarpiece. Zoroastrian fire altar at Naxxrastam, near the site of Persepolis, Iran. Nigerian chieftain's bronze altar of the hand, symbolizing the power of the hand. It would be placed on a mud altar during religious ceremonies. British Museum,